Jake Morrison sat in his fighter cockpit, staring at the controls he had crashed with 17 times before. His hands shook slightly as he went through the pre-flight checklist. Every other pilot in the hangar gave him a wide space. They all knew his reputation. He was the worst pilot in the entire Terran defense fleet. The mechanics working on nearby fighters whispered jokes about him. They called him Crash Morrison behind his back. Some said he could crash a ship while it was still parked. Others bet on how many seconds he would last in actual combat. The betting pool currently stood at 37 seconds. Jake knew what? They all thought about him. He had heard the stories they told. There was the time he flew his fighter backwards during a military parade. The crowd thought it was some kind of special stunt until he crashed into a hot dog stand. Then there was the incident where he somehow managed to shoot down 3 friendly drones during target practice. He was aiming at enemy targets at the time. His service record was a disaster. 17 crashed fighters, 12 friendly fire incidents, 6 emergency landings in civilian areas, 2 accidental launches while the fighter was still in the hangar, 1 memorable crash during a routine maintenance check when the engines were not even running. The mechanics still could not figure out how he managed that one. Captain Lisa Hayes walked over to his fighter. She was his commanding officer, and the only person who had not given up on him completely. She still believed he might be useful somehow. Jake respected her for that, even though he was not sure she was right. "Morrison," she said, climbing up to his cockpit. "You know this is probably a suicide mission." Jake nodded. Everyone knew the odds. The Zephyrian Empire had brought their entire battle fleet to attack the human colony on New Austin. Their ships were bigger, faster, and had better weapons than anything humans could build. The alien technology was centuries ahead of human engineering. "I know, Captain," Jake replied, "but someone has to fly." She looked at him with something that might have been respect. "Your fighter is the oldest one we have left. The engines are held together with spare parts and hope. The weapons system has not been updated in 20 years. The life support makes strange noises." Jake patted the control panel gently. "She might be old, but she still flies." "When you are flying her, she barely flies," Captain Hayes said with a small smile. "Try not to crash into our own ships this time." The alarm sirens started wailing throughout the space station. Red lights flashed in the hangar bay. Over the intercom system, a voice announced that enemy ships had been detected approaching the colony. All pilots were ordered to launch immediately. Jake watched as the other fighters launched from the hangar bay one by one. Each pilot flew their ships smoothly out into space. Their movements were precise and professional. They made it look easy. Jake knew that when his turn came, it would not look easy at all. "Morrison, you are cleared for launch," came the voice from flight control. The hangar bay doors opened, showing the black space beyond. Stars twinkled in the distance. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian fleet was coming to destroy everything humans had built on New Austin. Jake pushed the throttle forward. His fighter lurched sideways before moving forward. The engines made a grinding noise that did not sound healthy. He managed to avoid hitting the hangar bay walls, but only barely. Behind him, he could hear the mechanics cheering sarcastically. Someone shouted that he had lasted longer than expected. Once in space, Jake could see the enemy fleet approaching. The Zephyrian ships were beautiful in a deadly way. They were sleek and silver with smooth curves. Energy weapons glowed along their hulls. The largest ship in the center was enormous. It was easily 10 times bigger than any human vessel. Golden decorations covered its surface, making it look more like a palace than a warship. The human fleet looked pathetic by comparison. Their ships were blocky and practical. They had been built for function, not beauty. Many showed signs of battle damage from previous fights. Some were held together with external patches and repair plates That Captain Hayes' voice came through the radio. All pilots, this is your mission briefing. We are outnumbered 10-1. Our orders are to protect the civilian evacuation ships for as long as possible. We are not expected to win this fight. We are expected to buy time. Jake understood what she was really saying. They were all going to die today. The only question was how long they could delay the inevitable. The civilian ships needed at least an hour to reach the jump point, where they could escape to hyperspace. The Zephyrian fleet began firing. Beams of purple energy lanced through space. Where they hit human ships, the metal glowed white-hot before exploding. The first 3 human fighters disappeared in balls of fire before they could even return fire. Jake tried to keep his fighter steady as he flew toward the enemy. His hands were sweating inside his flight gloves. The controls felt slippery. His fighter wobbled back and forth as he struggled to maintain course. Other pilots flew past him in perfect formation. He felt like he was flying in slow motion. A Zephyrian fighter swooped down at him, firing green energy bolts. Jake yanked on the controls, trying to dodge. His fighter spun wildly to the left. The enemy shots missed him completely, but only because his ship was moving so unpredictably. Even Jake did not know where he was going to be from one second to the next. He tried to fire back, but his targeting computer could not lock onto anything while his ship was spinning. The weapons fired randomly in all directions. By pure accident, one shot hit a piece of space debris that had been floating nearby. The debris exploded in a shower of sparks. More enemy fighters came at him. Jake pulled up hard on the controls. His fighter climbed straight up, then flipped over backwards. The maneuver was completely wrong, but it confused the Zephyrian pilots. They had never seen anything like it. Their shots went wide as they tried to predict where he would go next. Jake was now flying upside down and backwards while spinning slowly to the right. He could not figure out how to stop any of these motions. Every time he touched the controls, something else went wrong. The engine noise was getting louder, and smoke was starting to fill the cockpit. Through his spinning viewport, he caught glimpses of the battle around him. Human ships were exploding faster than he could count them. The Zephyrian fleet was advancing steadily toward the planet. Soon they would be in range of the civilian evacuation ships. Suddenly, his fighter was hit by something. Jake felt the impact through his seat. Warning lights started flashing all over his control panel. The engine noise changed to a high-pitched whine. His flight computer announced in a calm voice that multiple systems were failing. Jake looked out his viewport and saw that he was now tumbling directly toward the largest Zephyrian ship, the one with all the golden decorations. He was moving fast and completely out of control. He tried everything he could think of to change course, but nothing worked. The controls were not responding at all. The massive enemy ship grew larger and larger in front of him. He could see details on its hull now. Intricate patterns were carved into the metal. Rows of weapons bristled along its sides. What looked like windows or observation decks ran along its length. It was clearly not just a warship, but something much more important. Jake realized he was going to crash into it. There was nothing he could do to stop it now. He closed his eyes and held on tight as his fighter slammed into the side of the enormous vessel. Jake woke up with his head pounding and smoke filling his nostrils. His fighter was a twisted wreck of metal around him. Sparks flew from broken wires and steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines. Somehow the cockpit had not been completely crushed. In the crash, he was alive when he should have been dead. He unbuckled his safety harness and tried to stand up. His legs were shaky and his left shoulder hurt badly. Through the cracked viewport, he could see he was inside some kind of hangar. Bay. The ceiling was high above him, with strange lighting that cast everything in a golden glow. The walls were covered in decorative patterns, unlike anything he had ever seen. Jake climbed out of his wrecked fighter and looked around. The hangar was enormous. It could have held 50 human fighters easily, but instead of military equipment, it was filled with what looked like artwork. Statues stood in neat rows. Paintings hung on the walls between elaborate light fixtures. Everything was made from precious metals and gemstones. This was not a normal warship. This was something much more important. Jake had crashed into what looked like a flying palace. The air smelled of exotic flowers and expensive perfumes. Even the floor was made from polished marble with gold inlays forming complex patterns. Needed to find a way off this ship before someone discovered him. But first, he wanted to cause as much damage as possible. If he was going to die anyway, he might as well make it count for something. Maybe he could sabotage their engines or weapons. Systems.Jake found a doorway leading deeper into the ship. The corridor beyond was just as fancy as the hangar. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Carpets that looked hand-woven covered the floors. Paintings of alien landscapes decorated the walls. He felt like he was walking through a museum. Not a spacecraft. He tried to move quietly, but his boots made noise on the hard floor. Every few steps, he stopped to listen for guards or crew members. So far, he had not seen anyone. The ship seemed almost empty, which was strange for a vessel this large. After walking for several minutes, Jake found what looked like a computer terminal. The screen was covered in alien writing that he could not read, but the symbols and layout reminded him of systems he had studied. During his many crashes, he had accidentally learned quite a bit about alien technology from examining the wreckage. Jake started pressing buttons randomly. He had no idea what he was doing, but sometimes random button pushing worked. The screen changed colors and new symbols appeared. An alarm started beeping softly somewhere in the walls. He had definitely activated something. He continued down the corridor looking for more systems to sabotage. Every room he passed was filled with luxury items. One room had a fountain in the center with water that glowed blue. Another room had what looked like a garden with plants he did not recognize. A third room contained musical instruments that chimed when he walked past them. Jake found another computer terminal and started pressing buttons again. This time, sparks flew from the screen and the lights in the corridor dimmed. He was getting better at breaking things. Years of crashing into alien ships had taught him which parts were most likely to fail when damaged. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Jake spun around and saw 3 alien figures approaching. They were tall and thin with pale blue skin. Their faces were angular, with large eyes that seemed to glow slightly. They wore elaborate uniforms, covered in gold braiding and decorative metals. The aliens stopped when they saw him. They seemed more surprised than angry. One of them said something in a language Jake did not understand. The words sounded like music, but he could hear the question in the tone. They wanted to know who he was and what he was doing there. Jake did not answer. Instead, he ran. He turned and sprinted down the corridor as fast as his injured leg would carry him. Behind him, he could hear the aliens shouting. Their voices were getting closer. More footsteps joined the pursuit. He turned a corner and found himself in a wider hallway. This one had moving walkways, like the kind used in spaceports. Jake jumped onto one that was going in the direction he wanted to travel. It carried him faster than he could run while the aliens had to chase him on foot. At the end of the walkway, Jake found a lift shaft. He pressed the call button and waited. The aliens were getting closer. He could see them running down the hallway toward him. The lift doors finally opened, and he dove inside just as the first alien reached him. The lift had buttons labeled with more alien symbols. Jake pressed one at random, and the lift started moving up. Through the transparent walls of the shaft, he could see he was traveling through the center of the ship. Level after level flashed past. Each one looked as fancy as the last. When the lift stopped, Jake found himself on what was clearly the command deck. The ceiling was a transparent dome, showing the space battle still raging outside. Human ships were being destroyed one by one, while the Zephyrian fleet advanced toward the planet. Soon the civilian evacuation ships would be in range of their weapons. The command deck was arranged in a circle around a raised platform in the center. Dozens of control stations surrounded the platform. Each station had multiple screens showing different information. Jake could not read the alien text, but some of the displays showed what were clearly star charts and tactical information. Most impressive was the view. The transparent dome gave a perfect view in all directions. Jake could see the battle happening below him. Explosions lit up the darkness as human fighters died trying to protect their people. It was beautiful and terrible. At the same time, Jake started moving from station to station, pressing buttons and pulling levers. Every time he touched something, new alarms started sounding. Lights began flashing all over the command deck. Several screens went dark while others started showing what looked like error messages. He found a station that seemed to control environmental systems. When he started pressing buttons, the air circulation changed. Fans started spinning faster, and the temperature began to rise. In another section, he found what looked like power distribution controls. When he activated those, several sections of the ship lost power. The lift doors opened and more aliens emerged. These ones were different from the guards he had seen before. They wore simpler uniforms and carried what were obviously weapons. They moved with military precision as they spread out across the command. Jake looked around for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The only way off the command deck was the lift, and the aliens were blocking that. He was trapped with no way out. At least he had managed to cause some damage before being captured. One of the aliens approached him slowly. This one was older than the others, with silver markings on his uniform. He spoke in accented but understandable human language. "You will surrender now, human. You have caused enough damage to our ship." Jake was surprised the alien could speak his language. "I am not surrendering to anyone," he replied. "You attacked my people first." The alien commander tilted his head slightly. "Your resistance is pointless. Your fleet is already defeated. Soon your planet will belong to the Empire." "Maybe," Jake said, looking out at the battle. "But I made it this far. That has to count for something." As if to prove his point, Jake reached over and pressed a large red button on the nearest control station. Immediately, all the lights on the command deck went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, but everything was now bathed in dim red light. The alien commander looked annoyed. "Stop touching our equipment, human," the commander said. "You do not understand what you are doing." "That never stopped me before," Jake replied and pressed another button. This time the artificial gravity fluctuated. For a few seconds, everyone on the command deck floated weightlessly before gravity returned with a jarring thump. Several aliens fell down when it came back on. Jake managed to stay on his feet by grabbing a control console. The alien commander was definitely angry now. He barked orders to his soldiers in their musical language. They started moving toward Jake with their weapons raised. Jake realized his luck was finally running out. He had caused more damage than he ever expected, but now he was going to pay for it. Just then, another set of lift doors opened at the far end of the command deck. What emerged made everyone stop and stare. It was clearly the most important person on the ship. The figure that stepped from the lift was unlike any alien Jake had seen before. He was tall even by Zephyrian standards, with skin that seemed to shimmer like crystal. His clothing was made from materials that looked more valuable than anything Jake had ever imagined. Gemstones were woven into the fabric itself, and precious metals formed intricate patterns across his robes. But it was his presence that made Jake understand immediately who this was. Every other alien on the command deck dropped to one knee when they saw him. The air itself seemed to vibrate with authority. This was not just any Zephyrian leader. This was their emperor. Emperor Vorthik looked around the command deck, taking in the flashing warning lights and damaged systems. His expression was hard to read, but Jake thought he detected more curiosity than anger. The Emperor's eyes were larger than those of the other Zephyrians, and they seemed to glow with an inner light. "Rise," the Emperor said in perfect human language. His voice carried easily across the command deck, despite speaking quietly. Every alien immediately stood up and moved back to give him space. The Emperor walked slowly toward Jake, studying him carefully. Jake found himself unable to move. He had never been in the presence of someone so clearly powerful. This being had probably lived for centuries and ruled over billions of subjects across dozens of worlds. "So," the Emperor said, stopping a few feet away from Jake, "you are the human who has invaded my personal ship, the one who has been causing such chaos among my crew." Jake tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. He swallowed hard and found his voice. "Your personal ship?" "The Celestial Dominion," the Emperor replied, gesturing around them. "My flagship and personal residence. In over 1,000 years of my reign, no unauthorized being has ever set foot aboard this vessel. Until today." Jake looked around the command deck with new understanding. That explained all the luxury and artwork. This was not just a warship, but the mobile palace of the most powerful being in the Zephyrian Empire. He had accidentally crashed into the most important ship in their entire fleet. "I did not mean to crash into your ship specifically," Jake said. "I was just trying not to get shot down." The Emperor's expression might have been amusement. "Yes, I observed your approach. Your flying technique is unlike anything in our tactical databases. My pilots had no idea how to respond to your movements." One of the alien commanders stepped forward and spoke rapidly in their musical language. Jake could not understand the words, but the tone sounded like an urgent report. The Emperor listened without changing expression, then waved the commander back. "My staff informs me that you have somehow managed to damage 17 separate systems throughout my ship," the Emperor said. "This despite having no knowledge of our technology and no access to technical manuals. How did you accomplish this?" Jake shrugged. "I just pressed buttons until something broke. I have had a lot of practice breaking things." "Interesting," the Emperor said. "Show me." Before Jake could ask what he meant, the Emperor gestured toward a nearby control station. Jake hesitated and walked over to it. The screen showed what looked like a status display with dozens of green indicators. Jake studied it for a moment, then started pressing buttons. Within seconds, several of the green lights turned red. An alarm started chiming and new text appeared on the screen. The alien technicians at nearby stations began working frantically to correct whatever Jake had just done. The Emperor watched this with what Jake was now certain was amusement. "Remarkable. You have just disabled our long-range communications array. It would take our engineers several minutes to accomplish the same task even with full authorization codes." "I told you I am good at breaking things," Jake said. "It is about the only thing I am good at." "I doubt that is true," the Emperor replied. "Tell me, human, what is your name and rank?" "Lieutenant Jake Morrison," Jake answered. "Terran Defense Fleet, serial number 77492. "And what is your specialty, Lieutenant Morrison? What role do you serve in your military?" Jake almost laughed. "I am a pilot. The worst pilot in human space, according to most people. I have crashed more ships than some people have flown." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. He walked over to the transparent dome and looked out at the space battle. Human ships were still being destroyed, but they were fighting harder than expected. The Zephyrian advance had slowed as human pilots threw themselves against impossible odds. Your people fight bravely, the Emperor said, but they cannot win. My fleet is too large and our technology too advanced. Maybe, Jake said, joining him at the dome. But we will not give up. That is what humans do. We keep fighting even when we cannot win. Why? The Emperor asked. What is the purpose of dying for a lost cause? Jake thought about that. Because giving up means everyone dies. Fighting means maybe some people live. Even if it is just a few more minutes, it is worth it. The Emperor nodded slowly. I have conquered many species across the galaxy. Most surrender when they realize they cannot win. Humans are different. We are stubborn, Jake agreed. Some people call it stupid, but we call it determined. Perhaps both are true, the Emperor said. Then he turned back to Jake with a more serious expression. I have a proposition for you, Lieutenant Morrison. What kind of proposition? I am curious about human capabilities. Your infiltration of my ship was accidental, but it demonstrated something unexpected. You succeeded where my own security forces believed success was impossible. Jake frowned. I just got lucky. And I crashed. Doing it. Did you, though? The Emperor asked. Or did you accomplish exactly what needed to be accomplished using methods no one else would have considered? Before Jake could answer, alarms started sounding throughout the ship. The command deck was suddenly filled with flashing lights and urgent voices. Jake could not understand what was being said, but the tone was clear. Something was going wrong. One of the alien commanders approached the Emperor and spoke quickly in their language. The Emperor listened and asked several sharp questions. The commander's answers seemed to concern him. What is happening? Jake asked. The Emperor turned to him with an expression Jake could not read. It seems your people have done something unexpected. Again. On the main display screen, an image appeared showing the space battle from above. Jake could see the human fleet had changed formation. Instead of trying to fight the Zephyrian ships directly, they had spread out and were attacking supply vessels and support ships at the edges of the alien formation. They are not trying to win the battle, Jake realized. They are trying to disrupt your logistics and communications. Yes, the Emperor said. A clever strategy. It will not save them, but it will cost us more time and resources than anticipated. Jake watched his fellow humans throwing themselves against the enemy fleet. Every ship that died bought the civilian evacuation vessels a few more precious minutes. Soon the evacuation would be complete, and thousands of human lives would be saved. They learned that from me, Jake said quietly. What do you mean? I never fought the way I was supposed to fight. I could not fly well enough for standard tactics, so I did things differently. Sometimes it worked better than it should have. The Emperor studied Jake's face carefully. You taught them to be unpredictable. Not on purpose. But yeah, I guess I did. Another alarm started sounding. This one was different from the others. More urgent. The alien crew was moving faster now, and their voices carried a note of concern that had not been there before. What now? Jake asked. The Emperor spoke quickly to his commanders, then turned back to Jake. It appears, Lieutenant Morrison, that you have created more damage than we initially realized. Several of the systems you sabotaged are now causing cascade failures throughout the ship. Jake looked around at the flashing lights and busy crew members. Is that bad? For my ship, yes. For your people, it may be very good indeed. As if to emphasize the point, another section of lights went out on the command deck. Emergency power came on immediately, but everyone could feel the ship shuddering slightly. Whatever Jake had broken was getting worse. The Emperor made a decision. He walked over to the central command station and began entering commands on a keyboard. The alien symbols flowed across the screen as he worked. What are you doing? Jake asked. Something I have never done before, the Emperor replied without looking up. I am going to let a human pilot fly my ship. Jake stared at the Emperor in complete shock. You want me to fly your ship? The same ship I just crashed into and filled with smoke? The same ship whose systems you have been systematically destroying for the past hour, the Emperor confirmed. Yes, that ship. That is the worst idea anyone has ever had, Jake said. I will probably crash it into your own fleet. The Emperor's expression might have been a smile. That would certainly be unexpected. Around them, the alien crew was working frantically to repair the damage Jake had caused. Sparks flew from control panels, and warning lights flashed everywhere. The ship continued to shudder as more systems failed. Whatever Jake had broken was spreading through the ship's computer network like a virus. Why would you let me fly your ship? Jake asked. That makes no sense. Because, Lieutenant Morrison, I am beginning to understand something important about humans, the Emperor said. You do not think the way other species think. Your failures are not really failures. They are just success that looks different from what everyone expects. Jake laughed despite the situation. You sound like my old flight instructor. He used to say I was not crashing. I was just landing in unexpected places. Perhaps he was correct. The Emperor walked over to the pilot's station at the center of the command deck. It was clearly designed for someone much more important than a regular pilot. The seat was made from materials that looked like they cost more than Jake's entire fighter. The control panels surrounded the pilot on 3 sides with hundreds of buttons, switches, and displays. This ship has been in my family for over 500 years, the Emperor said, running his hand along the control panel. It was built by the finest engineers in the Empire using technology that is still considered advanced today. The computer systems can calculate hyperspace jumps to the nearest microsecond. The weapons can destroy a planet from orbit. The shields can withstand the energy output of a star. And you want me to fly it, Jake said. I want to see what happens. When human unpredictability meets Zephyrian technology, the Emperor replied. Call it scientific curiosity. Jake looked out through the transparent dome at the battle raging below. The human fleet was down to less than half its original size. They were still fighting, but they could not hold out much longer. Soon the Zephyrian fleet would break through their lines and destroy the evacuation ships. What about the battle? Jake asked. Your people are winning. Yes, they are winning, the Emperor agreed. But it is taking longer than expected and costing more resources than planned. Your people are proving more difficult to defeat than our intelligence suggested. We are full of surprises. Indeed you are. The Emperor gestured toward the pilot's seat. Will you accept my challenge, Lieutenant Morrison? Jake looked at the complex control systems surrounding the pilot station. He had never seen anything so advanced. His old fighter had maybe 50 controls total. This ship had thousands. He would probably destroy something important just by sitting down. But looking out at the battle, he realized this might be the only chance to help his people. If he could somehow disrupt the Zephyrian attack, even for a few minutes, it might give the evacuation ships enough time to escape. If I do this, what happens to my people? Jake asked. That depends on how well you fly my ship, the Emperor said. Impress me, and we will discuss terms for ending this battle. Fail to impress me, and the attack continues as planned. Those are not very good odds for my side. They are better odds than you had 5 minutes ago. Jake had to admit that was true. 5 minutes ago, his people had no chance at all. Now they had a small chance, which was infinitely better than no chance. Okay, Jake said, walking toward the pilot station. But do not blame me when this goes badly. Lieutenant Morrison, I am counting on this going badly. Just not badly for me. Jake sat down in the pilot's seat and immediately felt overwhelmed. There were so many controls, he did not know where to start. The displays showed information in alien languages he could not read. The control panels extended far enough that He could not reach some of the switches without getting up. The good news, the Emperor said standing behind him, is that most of these controls are automated. The ship's computer handles navigation, life support, communications, and defensive systems. You only need to worry about basic flight controls and weapons. Basic flight controls, Jake repeated. Right. The Emperor pointed to a series of controls directly in front of the pilot's seat. These control pitch, yaw, and roll. These control forward and reverse thrust. This activates the main engines. This activates the maneuvering thrusters. Jake studied the controls. They were not that different from his old fighter, just much more complex and expensive looking. What about weapons? These panels control the main batteries, the Emperor said, indicating a section to Jake's left. These control the secondary weapons. These control the defensive systems. And what do all these other controls do? Jake asked, waving at the hundreds of other buttons and switches. Try not to touch those, the Emperor suggested. Jake placed his hands on the basic flight controls. The moment he touched them, every display on the command deck changed. New information appeared on screens throughout the bridge. The ship's engines came online with a deep rumble that Jake could feel through his seat. Interesting, the Emperor sighed. The ship's computer has accepted you as pilot. That should not be possible without proper authorization codes. Maybe it recognizes a fellow disaster waiting to happen, Jake said. He gently pushed forward on the main thrust control. The celestial dominion began moving forward slowly. Through the transparent dome, Jake could see they were approaching the main battle area. Human and Zephyrian ships were fighting desperately all around them. Your fleet will not fire on this ship, the Emperor said. They recognize it as my flagship. But they also will not expect it to behave unpredictably. Jake pushed the thrust control further forward. The massive ship began accelerating toward the battle. It moved with surprising grace for something so enormous. Jake could feel the power of the engines through the deck plates. This ship had more power than anything he had ever imagined. What exactly am I supposed to do? Jake asked as they approached. The first group of fighting ships. Show me how humans think, the Emperor replied. Do something no Zephyrian pilot would ever consider. Jake looked out at the battle and tried to think of what a normal pilot would do in this situation. A normal pilot would probably use the ship's superior firepower to destroy the remaining human ships quickly and efficiently. They would position themselves at maximum weapons range and systematically eliminate targets. So Jake did the opposite. He pushed the engines to full power and aimed the ship directly into the middle of the battle. The celestial dominion accelerated toward a group of fighting ships at maximum speed. Lieutenant Morrison, what are you doing? The Emperor asked. Something stupid, Jake replied. As they approached the fighting ships, Jake suddenly pulled up hard on the flight controls. The massive ship climbed steeply, missing a human fighter by less than 50 meters. The human pilot was so surprised he forgot to shoot. Several Zephyrian fighters had to scatter to avoid being hit by their own flagship. Jake continued the climb, then rolled the ship over and dove back toward the battle. This time he aimed for a different group of ships. Again, at the last second he changed direction, causing chaos among both fleets. This is not combat flying, the Emperor observed. This is something else entirely. This is Jake Morrison flying, Jake said, pulling the ship through another impossible maneuver. I told you I was the worst pilot in human space. But something strange was happening. Jake's erratic flying was causing both fleets to change their tactics. Human pilots were taking advantage of the confusion to escape from hopeless situations. Zephyrian pilots were being forced to break off attacks to avoid their own flagship. The battle was still happening, but it was no longer following any logical pattern. Ships were scattered across a much wider area. Formation flying had become impossible. Individual pilots were making their own decisions instead of following fleet tactics. "Your flying is completely unpredictable," the Emperor said, watching the chaos around them. "But it is having an effect on the battle." Jake looked at the tactical display and realized the Emperor was right. The human evacuation ships were almost at the jump point. They needed just a few more minutes to reach safety. His crazy flying had bought them that time. "Maybe being unpredictable is not such a bad thing," Jake said. Jake continued flying the Celestial Dominion through maneuvers that defied every rule of space combat. He rolled the massive ship through loops that should have been impossible for something so large. He flew backwards while spinning sideways. He dove toward asteroids and pulled away at the last possible second. Every move he made caused chaos in both fleets. Zephyrian pilots had never seen their flagship behave this way. They were afraid to fire their weapons in case they accidentally hit their Emperor's ship. Human pilots were equally confused, but they were starting to take advantage of the situation. "Look at the tactical display," the Emperor said, pointing to a screen showing the overall battle. "Your people are regrouping. They are using the confusion you have created to organize a coordinated withdrawal." Jake glanced at the display while pulling the ship through another impossible turn. The human fleet was indeed changing formation. Instead of fighting desperately in small groups, they were coming together into a defensive formation. They were covering each other's retreat toward the jump point. "They are learning," Jake said with pride. "They are adapting to the situation." "As are my pilots," the Emperor observed. "But they are adapting more slowly. They have never encountered tactics like this before." Jake looked out at the battle and saw something that made him smile. Several human pilots were now copying his erratic flying style. They were making wild, unpredictable turns and sudden direction changes. The Zephyrian targeting computers could not lock onto them. "They are flying like me," Jake said with amazement. "Is that good or bad?" the Emperor asked. "For them it is very good," Jake replied. "For your people it is probably very bad." Jake was right. The Zephyrian fleet was having serious problems. Their advanced targeting systems were designed to predict logical flight patterns. When faced with completely illogical flying, they became confused and missed their targets. Their formation flying fell apart as pilots tried to avoid their own flagship while tracking erratically moving targets. Meanwhile, the human evacuation ships were approaching the jump point. The civilian vessels would be safe in just a few more minutes. Jake realized his mission was almost complete. He had bought his people the time they needed, but he was also starting to understand something else. The Emperor had not just let him fly this ship to satisfy curiosity. He had been testing something. He wanted to see how humans would respond to unexpected opportunities. "You planned this," Jake said as he guided the ship through another series of turns. "I planned nothing," the Emperor replied, "but I have been watching and learning. Your people do not react the way other species react. When presented with impossible situations, you find impossible solutions. We get creative when we have to." "Yes, you do. And that creativity makes you either very valuable allies or very dangerous enemies." Jake looked at him with sudden understanding. "This was never just about conquering human colonies, was it?" "You were testing us." The Emperor nodded slowly. "The Zephyrian Empire has conquered hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. Most surrendered quickly when they realized resistance was futile. A few fought bravely, but followed predictable patterns. None of them surprised us the way humans have. So what happens now?" Before the Emperor could answer, the communication system activated. Captain Hayes' voice filled the command deck, speaking in clear human language. "This is Captain Lisa Hayes of the Terran Defense Fleet, calling the Zephyrian flagship. We know you have our pilot, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, aboard your vessel. We demand his immediate release. Jake looked at the Emperor with surprise. How did she know I was here? Your flying style is rather distinctive, the Emperor said, with what might have been amusement. Your captain recognized it immediately. The Emperor activated the communication system. This is Emperor Vorthik speaking to Captain Hayes. Your Lieutenant Morrison is unharmed and currently serving as my pilot. There was a long pause before Captain Hayes responded. He is doing what? Flying my flagship, the Emperor said simply. Rather well, actually, considering his reputation. Jake took control of the communication system. Captain, this is Morrison. I am okay, and the evacuation ships are almost at the jump point. How much more time do you need? 2 more minutes, Jake, Captain Hayes replied. Can you give us 2 more minutes? Jake looked at the tactical display. The Zephyrian fleet was starting to reorganize despite the chaos. Some of their commanders were figuring out how to work around the unpredictable flying. In 2 minutes, they would probably have things under control again. I can give you 2 minutes, Jake said, but it is going to get interesting. Jake pushed the ship's engines to maximum power and dove toward the largest concentration of Zephyrian vessels. At the last second, he activated every maneuvering thruster at once. The celestial dominion spun through a complex corkscrew pattern that scattered the enemy formation like leaves in a windstorm. Several Zephyrian ships collided with each other, trying to avoid the flagship. Others were forced to brake hard to avoid hitting asteroids. The carefully organized attack formation dissolved into complete chaos once again. Lieutenant Morrison, the Emperor said calmly, you are either the worst pilot I have ever seen or the most brilliant tactical genius in the galaxy. Probably both, Jake replied while pulling the ship through another impossible maneuver. The communication system activated again. This time, it was Captain Hayes with the news Jake had been hoping to hear. All evacuation ships have reached the jump point, she announced. Civilian population is safe. All remaining military vessels are withdrawing to hyperspace. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. The civilians were safe, and most of the military personnel would survive to fight another day. His crazy flying had actually accomplished something useful for once. Congratulations, Lieutenant Morrison, the Emperor said. You have achieved the impossible. You have saved your people using the worst flying I have ever witnessed. Jake brought the ship to a stable hover and looked out at the aftermath of the battle. The human fleet was disappearing into hyperspace one ship at a time. Soon only the Zephyrian fleet would remain. The battle was over, and somehow the humans had achieved their objective. What happens to me now? Jake asked. The Emperor was quiet for a moment. Then he activated the ship's communication system and broadcast on all frequencies so both fleets could hear him. I am Emperor Vorthek of the Zephyrian Empire, he announced. Today I have learned something important about the human species. They are not just another race to be conquered and absorbed into our empire. They are something new and unexpected. He paused and looked directly at Jake. Therefore, I am declaring an immediate ceasefire. All Zephyrian forces will withdraw from human space. We will establish diplomatic relations with the Terran Defense Fleet to discuss terms for a mutual defense treaty. Jake stared at him in shock. A treaty? You mean we are not enemies anymore? Lieutenant Morrison, any species that can produce pilots like you is too valuable to destroy and too dangerous to ignore. I would rather have humans as allies than as enemies. The communication system crackled with responses from both fleets. Human voices expressed surprise and cautious relief. Zephyrian commanders requested confirmation of their orders. Everyone seemed stunned by this unexpected development. Captain Hayes' voice came through the speakers. Emperor Vorthik, this is an unexpected turn of events. We will need time to discuss your proposal with our government. Of course, the Emperor replied. Lieutenant Morrison will remain aboard my ship as our first human diplomatic liaison, if that is acceptable to him. Jake looked around the luxurious command deck and thought about his crashed fighter back in the hangar bay. He thought about his reputation as the worst pilot in human space. Then he thought about what he had just accomplished, flying the most advanced ship in the Zephyrian fleet. I accept, Jake said, but I am keeping my rank and wearing my own uniform. Agreed, the Emperor said, though I think we will need to update your service record. Worst pilot in human space no longer seems accurate. Jake laughed as he looked. Out at the peaceful space around them, the battle was over. His people were safe, and somehow he had gone from being the most incompetent pilot in the fleet to the first human ambassador to an alien empire. You know, Jake said to the Emperor, this is the first time I have ever landed exactly where I was supposed to be. The Emperor's expression was definitely amusement now. Lieutenant Morrison, I suspect that everything you have ever done has landed you exactly where you were supposed to be. You just did not realize it at the time. Jake had to admit that made a strange kind of sense. All his crashes and failures had taught him things he never would have learned otherwise. His reputation for incompetence had made him the perfect person for this impossible mission. Sometimes being the worst at something was just another way of being the best. As the Celestial Dominion turned toward the diplomatic station where the peace negotiations would take place, Jake Morrison settled back in the pilot's seat of the most advanced ship in the galaxy. For the first time in his career, he was flying something he had not crashed yet.